I have not met my next guest. I'm looking forward to talking with him. His name is Frank Abagnale.
My name is Frank William Abagnale.
Mi nombre es Frank William Abagnale.
My name is Frank William Abagnale.
Mi nombre es Frank William Abagnale.
My name is Frank William Abagnale.
Mi nombre es Frank William Abagnale.
And he had a short but illustrious career as a con man. Some of the things he did, he impersonated a co-pilot from a major airline. He faked it as a lawyer on the state attorney general's staff. Passed as a pediatrician in a Georgia hospital. Was a phony college professor. And cashed 17,000 bad checks amounting to $2.5 million.
When did he get out?
And he did spend some time. Now, those are fascinating things I read. The audience went, what? It's a little bit like the story of Fred DeMera?
Right.
In which they made a movie, The Great Imposter. Passed as a pediatrician, was a phony college professor. Now, you did all these things for what reason?
Well, basically, at the age of 16, coming from a little town in upstate New York, my parents separated when I was 16, and kind of emotionally bothered me, and I couldn't get my parents back together again, so I ran away from home and found myself in New York City without a job, with no money. And as I went in and looked for employment, people would say, "How old are you?" I'd tell them I was 16. They wanted to pay me $1.25, $1.50, and I realized I couldn't support myself in New York on that amount of money. So I decided to advance my age. I always looked a little older, so I started saying I was 26 years old. People started paying me a little more money, but not enough to support myself. So I got into the habit of starting to write personal checks without having any money in the bank. The more I did that, the more confidence I built up that I could do it, and found that people easily accepted my checks.
Most people don't realize how gullible the average storekeeper is. So you can walk in with a picture, any identification that people can have made. Did you use various names?
Yes, I also use various occupations. For example, the airline pilot with Pan American.
Did you actually fly on a plane?
Well, I would fly up in the cockpit so that I could fly for free. And I had a uniform. How I got this idea...
How did you was it Pan Am?
Right.
How did you con them into that you...
Well, how I got this idea, it was time for me to leave New York, since the police were looking for me, not only as a runaway...
Good time to leave.
But for the bad checks. And I happened to be walking up 42nd Street, and I saw this airline crew come out of a hotel, and I thought that would be the perfect front for me to be able to travel around the country posing as a pilot. Not only could I fly for free, but I would also be able to stay at hotels for free.
Because they do have reciprocal things, don't they, the airlines? I mean, that's what they call like deadheading. You can get on a plane if you're a member of one of the major airlines.
So the first thing to do is get a uniform, and so I called Pan American Airlines, got their switchboard, and asked for their purchasing department. I guess this was my first con, and when the purchasing officer came on, I told him that I was a pilot based in LA, was here in New York on a layover. Someone had stolen my uniform. Where could I get a replacement? And he sent me down to the uniform company and called up ahead, told them I was coming. They fitted me out. When he was done, the uniform manufacturer said, I said, "How much is it?" He said, "Well, it's $289. I said, "Well, I'll write you a check." He said, "No, I can't take a check." I said, "Well, I'll pay you in cash." He said, "No, I can't take cash." So I said, "Oh," he said, "I have to bill this back to your payroll account, and it'll be deducted from your uniform allowance." I said, "Oh, that's even better." And I then had the uniform, but I didn't have an identification card. And so I went to a large manufacturer that I found in the Yellow Pages in New York of identification cards, and I told them that I represented an airline in Puerto Rico that was getting ready to expand service to the United States, hire on 200 new employees, and we wanted to go to a formal ID card. Well, he told me, "That's fine." He said, "Let me show you some samples." I said, "This is what we're looking for." And he said, "Okay, let me give you a sample to take back." And I said, "Could you fix it up? I mean, laminate it and make it look like a finished product. You can use me in the picture if you like." He said, "Oh, fine, have a seat." The problem I had is when I left there, it had no name on it. It had no airline's insignia, no name, and it had already been laminated, so I couldn't type anything on or put anything on. So I walked by an airplane hobby shop, and I walked in and bought a little model of a Pan Am plane. And I took the decals out of the box and soaked them in water, put the little logo that would have went on the tail up on the check, up on the ID card, and then the word Pan Am, what would have went on the wing, across the ID card, and the clear decal on the plastic made a great card.
Everybody likes a good scam, don't they? I mean, secretly.
I think so.
Well, do these ideas come to you quickly, or do you sit and think and figure them out?
I would think them out. I did that for about 2 years. I traveled around about 82 countries.
When did they catch
Always,
you on the checks? Obviously, the checks caught up with you.
Well, what I would do is I'd check into a hotel as an airline crew member, sign in, be billed back to the airline. Then I'd check out in the morning and I'd write a personal check in the beginning. And of course, the airlines had an agreement to cover their employees' checks up to $100 with the hotel, so they would go ahead and accept it. And then as I progressed, I started making up airline checks so that I could make them for $300 or $400.
Certainly.
And I would flew some 3 million miles, always rode in the cockpit in the jump seat as a non-revenue pilot, always rode on every one but Pan Am so that no one would ask me,
Sure.
where are you based, and so forth.
Didn't any of the pilots say, hey, what do you think of the new low-ran system or the DME or...
Well, when I first started, I was in LaGuardia Airport sitting in a restaurant, and I'd only had the uniform a couple of days, and a TWA pilot walked in and said, how you doing? Said hello, and he said, what kind of equipment are you on?
¿Qué clase de equipo vuelas? ¿DC-8?
707.
And I thought, well, equipment, I didn't know what to say, so I said, General Electric. And he said, oh, and he walked out. So I quickly found out what equipment meant, what type of aircraft.
What kind of aircraft you fly?
¿Qué significa cuando un piloto le dice a otro piloto qué clase de equipo vuelas?
Es la clase de avión que vuelan, DC-8, 707, Constellation.
You know, if you really look like you belong somewhere, it's true, isn't it? And you have a feeling of authority, people will almost accept you any place if you do it directly
That's
head
very
on.
true.
Most of the cons you've had, or the flim-flam games, were against corporations like airlines and so forth. Did you ever work on individuals as a con type of thing?
Only once. I was in Miami and I was posing as a wealthy stockbroker, which was a front for passing checks. And I had rented a Rolls Royce with a chauffeur. I was about 18 at the time. And I was staying at the Fontainebleau Hotel for about $500 a day, had a penthouse, and all of this was a front for me. And I met a city councilman in Miami, and he was very impressed, thought I was about 32, very wealthy, and he invited me to a party they were giving for the mayor of Miami at the mayor's home. And while I was there, I ran into a gorgeous model, a well-known model at that time, and one of the guests came over and said, kind of have to watch her. He said, if you were thinking about taking her back to your room this evening, it would cost you a great deal of money, so watch
She was
yourself.
a lady of the evening. Yeah.
Right. So when I got talking with her, I said, how much would it cost me to take you back to my room for the rest of the evening? And she said, well, how much do you think I'm worth? Being 18, I had no idea how much she was worth. I offered $300, and she said, no, that's a little...
I'd go back to your room with you for $300.
She said, that's a little bit too low. So I said, okay, well, what if I doubled it and made it $600? And she said, well, that's a little more like it. I said, I'll tell you what, we'll be here all night. I'll tell you what, why don't you just take me back to your hotel room for 2 hours, and I'll pay you $1,000 in cash in advance. She said, let's go. So we went back to her hotel, and she was opening her door, and I said, now, I'll be right back. She said, wait a minute, where are you going? I said, well, I don't carry $1,000 on me. I'm going downstairs in the lobby, cash a check, I'll be right back. She said, this hotel isn't going to cash a check at this hour of the morning for $1,000. I said, first of all, I own 35% of this hotel. Never been in it in my life, of course. And I said, this is a cashier's certified check. I said, just like gold, they'll cash it. She said, let me see. This is a cashier's check. Why don't you just make it out to me? I said, are you crazy? I said, this check is for $1,400. We already agreed on $1,000. So she gave me 400 change, and that's what it cost me.
Yes, double jeopardy.
No, that's what's known as hooking the hooker.
Hooking the hooker. Now, when did the check, did you spend time?
I was
You know, this
eventually-
sounds kind of glamorous, but come on, this is illegal and it's a crime.
Okay, really, I think being quite honest about it, people say it must have been very glamorous, but to me it was kind of very lonely, despairing life, constantly being on the run all the time for 5 years. I was eventually caught in a little town in southern France when a stewardess recognized me from a photograph, and I was arrested, convicted by the French courts, sent to prison in France. Later extradited to Sweden, convicted by the Swedish courts, sent to prison there, and later extradited to the United States and sent to federal prison here in the United States. During my stay in the federal prison system, I escaped 3 times. On one particular occasion, I impersonated a prison inspector and walked out the front door of these. But I eventually served my time.
You did serve your
I
time.
did serve my time.
There must be a place for you in show business.
This is really incredible. Now, what do you do now? Have you got a legitimate type of...
Yes. For the last 4 years, I have a firm in Houston, and I do consulting work for large corporate banks and department stores and stuff like that on how not to get ripped off.
in other words, you use preventive measures and so forth.
Right.
Yeah, because I've had Ray Johnson on the show a couple of times,
Right.
who served many years in prison and does that kind of work now, you know, helps people get their security and so forth. So you're not recommending this kind of...
No, I definitely wouldn't.
How did you pass yourself as a pediatrician? Now, that's kind of tricky because, I mean, that's technical and...
Well, as the pediatrician, probably, it was really ended up being the most easiest, which should have been the most difficult. I supervised 7 interns on the midnight to 8 shift.
Have you had any medical training?
No medical training. And I don't like the sight of blood. And when I would be called to the emergency room, I'd walk in, there'd be 2 or 3 interns there, and I'd be called down, and I'd walk in, and I'd say, "What's the problem?" And they'd say, "Doctor, we have a severe incardio here with a..." I didn't know if the guy broke his leg, had a heart attack. So I would say, "Well, Dr. Carter, what do you think?" "Well, doctor, I would like to administer 30 cc's of this." "Dr. John, I concur." "Dr. Jane, I concur." "Gentlemen, have at it." And out I would go. Well, I became one of the most respected residents because I was the only one that ever allowed them to do anything without interference.
It says on the card here, you also faked it as a lawyer on a state attorney general staff. Can you talk about that?
Yes, after the doctor thing, had enough confidence to go down and...
Did they ever catch you on the doctor's thing?
No.
Or you just finally got tired of it?
I was never caught in any of my impersonations. They found out about them later after I resigned and left. And
you were paid well for those?
Right. Paid well.
Didn't they ever say, "Doctor, could we see your certificate in pediatrics or your MD?
I would present phony credentials.
You had phony, of course,
Right.
I thought.
And I went down and presented some credentials to take the bar in Louisiana. And I studied for it for about 3 or 4 months, took it 3 times. The 3rd time I passed it, legally passed it, and went on work as a corporate lawyer on the Attorney General's staff, and worked there for almost a year.
Yeah.
Won a number of cases while I was there.
Did you ever get the feeling you could end up prosecuting yourself?
Yes.
But that's weird. Airline pilot, doctor.
Did you have to watch drinking so that you wouldn't fumble, or could you not drink, or did you have to watch yourself that way?
I always did. I never drank, I never smoked, and today I don't smoke and drink very little as a result.
You must have been running on a sort of adrenaline high the whole time.
I was running a lot.
Do you miss the challenge of that? I mean, do you ever get that little craving and saying, "Hey, I've got a real scam that I think would be fun to do"?
Not
We
really.
must understand, and I think we point out so we don't get mail tomorrow, that we're not saying, you know,
Crime
this
pays,
is the kind of thing because it's amusing, because you serve time in all of those prisons.
Right. I feel that what I do now I find very challenging. People sometimes pay me to go into their places of business and actually see if I can beat a system or write a bad check in one particular bank or something, shortchange someone.
What's the best way to tell a bad check? Is there any way?
In dealing with personal checks, the best way is by the number up in the right-hand corner of your check.
Do we have... Well, this is the thing. It says, how to detect bad checks. 6 simple steps. You want to talk about those as we show them? One of them is feel the edges.
Right.
What does that mean?
Okay, this is a card that I design that banks and retail stores use. One of it, feel the edges, is that all legitimate checks are perforated on at least one of their 4 sides. Most forgeries are not. Second is the code number. The first number after this bracket on an account number is the Federal Reserve Bank. There are 12 Federal Reserve Banks in the United States. California is 12. All of the West Coast is 12. A forger, for example, cashing a LA check in LA would change the number 12 on the check to the number 01, which would send it to Boston. That gives him 6 days, 3 days while it gets out, 3 days while it gets back, 6 days to cash checks without anyone knowing.
Yes, but if a forger can make these kind of checks up with the perforations and have them printed, how is anybody supposed to tell it's a bad check?
Well, one would be this knowing your correct code number. When you train a teller, you teach her to know that California is 12. So if someone gave her a check, it was from a California bank and it was 01, it's a forgery.
But why wouldn't the forger, if he's bright, make it up and put 12 there?
Well, 12 would bounce in less than 24 hours.
This gives him a chance to...
01 would take 6 days to bounce.
I'm hip.
La máquina lee en cada banco los números en la base del cheque. Siguiente. Y luego, Envía el cheque a la sucursal correspondiente.
Para los que no estamos familiarizados con fraudes bancarios, ¿puedes decirnos de qué demonios hablas?
Las del este están numeradas del 01 al 06, las del centro 07 y 08, etcétera, etcétera.
O sea que los números de los cheques tienen un significado.
Sí se cambia. Un 02 a un 12 significa que el cheque que se cambió en Nueva York no va a la sucursal de Nueva York, se enruta hasta la sucursal federal de San Francisco. El banco no sabe que el cheque rebotó hace 15 días, o sea que el sujeto puede quedarse en un lugar y actuar en la misma ciudad mientras los cheques recorren el país.
What else now?
This is magnetic ink, and magnetic ink is a dull ink, and most forgers cannot obtain it. Magnetic ink will not reflect under light, and so the forger uses standard black ink, and when the teller goes like this with the check under her light, she sees a glare or a shine off of this number, she knows it's standard black ink.
Now, how many stores and people in stores are trained? I can see in banks, but how many people in clerks and so forth are trained to do this?
I designed this card about a year ago. Over 1 million of them have been sold. They're used by retailers, banks, they're used in schools for educating distributive education students and students going into the banking retail business.
Now,
so
it
it's
says,
useful
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it says require proper identification. Now, anybody could go and print up a phony driver's license, can they not, and put their picture on it?
That's true, but most people don't have to do that. They can just take someone's driver's license. Not too long ago, demonstrating for Kroger stores, I walked into a store and showed them that I went through an express lane, wrote a check with my check for $10, and gave the girl the store manager's driver's license. Well, not only was he not me, but he was black and I'm white. And she
they cashed the check. Little lax there. We'll be right back.
Bueno chicos, sé que este video fue algo distinto, estoy experimentando un poco con lo que quería hacer, espero que les haya gustado. Y quería decir que muchas gracias por el apoyo en el video anterior, bueno, casi, el irlandés, nunca había tenido tanto apoyo. Muchas gracias a Mendoza por eso, y esperen más. Sé que suelo tratar en subir videos más elaborados y tal, pero tengo, ya saben, los problemas con el tiempo y tal, y trato de tomarme mi tiempo para que queden lo mejor posible y que tengan buena calidad al menos. Entonces, muchas gracias por la paciencia y por el apoyo.